And we are live. Welcome back. This is episode number 39 of Calibrated with Scott. I'm Scott, of course. Today I'm joined by a very special guest, somebody that I've spent a lot of time with in Twitter Spaces, somebody that I've talked with a lot over the DMs, and somebody who is very knowledgeable about the current situation in Serbia. That person is Cossack. Cossack, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fine. I'm doing fine. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. It's we've done a podcast, I think, or you've done a related podcast, and that's kind of how I came to know who you were. And I have, like I said, listened to you in Twitter Spaces for quite a long time, and you are very linguistically talented, and obviously speaking multiple languages, it comes naturally. But I would love for you to come on here and explain to my audience what's going on in Serbia right now, if you don't mind. I know that's a big ask, but I think people want to know.
Sure. Because currently there are ongoing protests against the Vučić government in Serbia. Uh, a couple of days ago, Mr. Vučić had attempted to form a counter rally. We'll talk about it later. It all stems from actually two shootings that happened recently. People have probably heard of it. It was also a school shooting. Around 10 individuals died. The shooter cannot be tried in courts, considering that he is under the age of criminal responsibility. So we're here in a dilemma, and Vucic decided to use the first shooting and then the second shooting, which happened the day after, to announce new measures which are practically a power grab. He wants to disarm the population, but probably it's going to be selective disarmament, if you get what I mean. He wanted to maximize penalties, shrink the age of criminal responsibility, recruit 2,500 new police officers, increase surveillance of the general population, both outside and on social media, to quote unquote prevent future shootings. And he even suggested to return the death penalty, but he cannot do that since Serbia is a member of the Council of Europe. This all led to a national outrage, and people decided to peacefully assemble against violence. Uh, for the first time, there were up to 50,000 attendants, and it all went downhill from there, as the government media instantly have seen this as an opposition rally, same with the government. And they started attacking these people who just wanted the violence to end. And then it did turn into an opposition rally. And next week, people came. There were over 100,000 attendants, which is quite big. We haven't seen these protests for a long time already. The 2019 protests were minor in comparison to this one, which all led to the president having a form of mental breakdown and decided to host his own counter meeting, the Serbia of Hope rally. Um, and it was held on this Friday, and it didn't go as planned. He bought over 3,000 buses. He attempted to drag over 160,000 people from outside of Belgrade and thousands from Belgrade itself. And because it started to rain, not only was the quota not fulfilled in multiple areas, but a lot of people left the rally because of the rain. So the number was constantly decreasing. The crazy part is that the rally seemingly had a budget of 10 million euros, and that budget was spent. 3.7 million euros and bribing people have been dragged over with around 2,000 dinars, which is approximately, let's say, $18 for any American viewer. And because of this spectacular flop, he didn't take it well. You could have seen it in his eyes and with his gestures that he wasn't happy during the rally. Some could say that this was like the most expensive psychotherapy session for an individual, and it was botched.
Yeah,
I'm
no,
going to like
go ahead.
specify the details a bit later about like the buses. It's going to be like very interesting if we cover some other topics. And on the next day, when the opposition rally was scheduled, it was raining again, and people thought it was going to be similar to the Vucic rally, that it was going to fail. But interestingly, it did not. Like dozens of thousands of people, if not well over 100,000, have managed to rally in Belgrade. They came there by their own will. No one was paying them. They weren't on a budget, and they still managed to have a higher attendance than a government rally which was funded and was filled with coercion. And he isn't taking it so well, I'd say.
Yeah, could you just very quickly explain to the people who don't know what the two different rallies are? So the one that was bribed, what were they rallying for, and you know how organic was it? And then for the opposition rally, what were they rallying for in terms of domestic issues and geopolitical issues?
Okay. I mean, geopolitically, there's no foundation. There is no geopolitics there. It's primarily about domestic issues, and whether you're for Vucic or against Vucic. That means we have seen left wingers and right wingers who hate Vucic banding together to practically protest against him. As for like the organic levels of the rally, as I said, Vucic's rally wasn't so organic. He was coercing people. He was paying people 2,000 dinars. He was practically hiring buses en masse to pick people up and to send them to Belgrade. 3,000, I think 752 actually were bought. It was like leaked. It wasn't just from Serbia. I personally have seen in my city where they were like preparing people to send them for the rally, buses with like car like registration plates, which are actually from Bosnia and Herzegovina instead of Serbia. We have also seen buses with Hungarian registration plates. We have also seen them with Albanian registration plates. We have seen them with even Kosovar registration plates, which were like coming to practically assist Vucic to hold his rally. Interestingly, though, Vucic also brought a couple of speakers in, including Milorad Dodik, the president of Republika Srpska, an entity in Bosnia and Herzegovina. He managed to also bring in Milan Knežević, a Montenegrin Serb politician. He managed to bring over, of course, Ivica Dačić, the Serbian Minister of Foreign Affairs. And interestingly, he also managed to bring Peter Szijjártó over, who is the Hungarian Minister of Foreign Affairs, and they were all like holding speeches praising the government. Interestingly, with Szijjártó, even though he is Hungarian, he held the speech in Serbian, and he didn't make any like grammatical error, which is quite surprising. The first part of his speech was generally good. He was practically thanking Serbia for serving the Hungarian minority well, that they had full rights in our country. They do. That Hungarians always cheer for us in sports unless it's against them, and that practically we're brotherly people. The second part of the speech made him sound like a government minister, or rather, a Serbian government minister. He started claiming that there are like external forces who want to topple both Hungary, which is true, and Serbia, like the government in Serbia, and that it is important for the people of Serbia to keep these powers out. And while these speeches were being held, you could have seen on live cameras from Belgrade streets of people just leaving the rally. Vucic didn't even get to speak yet, and around half of the people left. By the time he entered, he wasn't happy. And his speech wasn't much. He just said that he will no longer be the president of the Serbian Progressive Party. And we now know the new president of the party, that is Miloš Vucevic, who is practically his puppet. That means that de jure Vucic is no longer the president, but de facto he is. So, in other words, he did nothing but slander the opposition on the rally. While on the other hand, the opposition didn't really have such centralized speakers or talking points. It was primarily just seeking to stop reality programs, to uh, secure freedom of speech, for fair broadcasting. They encircled the RTS building, which is the radio television of Serbia, because they're the main government run organization with the most views in Serbia. So they demanded fair broadcasting, considering that most people think that RTS has been practically taken over by Vucic and the government. They asked for that, and because of this like encirclement entrapment, RTS actually had to show the protests, which is a huge step for the opposition, considering that people who watch RTS are usually not able to see the size of like protests or that there is like larger opposition to the president. During the last two oppositional rallies before this one, RTS was very keen on not showing the protest, to not show its size. They even accidentally showed 5 seconds of the protest, and they literally went, "Oh, sorry, technical difficulties. We gotta change that. We are going to change that." And then they showed like a small cluster of protesters to make it seem different.
Do these rallies and protests have anything to do with I mean, the heightened tensions, I guess, anything to do with the recent actions that happened in Kosovo, with the Albanians coming in and removing, or the Kosovo police coming in and removing Serbian authorities from their uh, offices?
Glad you asked. That's interesting. Remember those buses that I mentioned? If you do,
Yes.
I mentioned Kosovar buses, including from a company that is personally close to Albin Kurti, the current prime minister of Kosovo. And around 5,000 Serbs from northern Kosovo, which is around the 10th of their population, were sent to Belgrade for the rally. And when they were sent, the Kosovar police went in and they attacked a defenseless population, basically, and secured control of the north. Some say that Vucic and Kurti have made a deal with one another, practically buses for the north, which is possible. But some say that Kurti did this by his own will, and that he just wants an incident, which we'll get to that later. The protests aren't so tied to it because it happened on this Friday. There were protests before that, 2 weeks to be precise. Most of May was generally marked by the Serbia against violence rallies. So I wouldn't say there's much to it, albeit, as we did mention Kosovo, uh, Northern Kosovo had some snap local elections, and the Serbs boycotted it. And the turnout was comedic low in these municipalities. Lepo Savic had a turnout of approximately 1%. Uh, Severna Mitrovica, which is North Mitrovica, a part of Kosovska Mitrovica, a Serb part of it, had the largest turnout with around 4.6%, if I'm not completely wrong. Leposavic is closer to around 2 or 3%, and similar could be said about Zubi Botok. These percentages mainly come from ethnic Albanians that live in the region, which of course that means that Albanians have won the local elections, including two from Levizia Vetevendosia, which is the party of Albin Kurti, and two have been won by the Partia Demokratika Kosovo, or the PDK, which is led by Hashim Taci. Um, so we just know that this is going to cause a problem, as we now have Albanian mayors governing Serb provinces, and these aren't just any parties. Both VV, Vetevendosia, and PDK are nationalistic parties. They aren't some secularist, let's say, progressive multi-ethnic parties, which could represent the Serbs. No, these are far from that. They are generally nationalistic and have openly supported the idea of a greater Albania. Even Kurti himself had taken a picture of him holding a map of greater Albania, which is just going to cause problems. Interestingly, about Kurti himself, in 1999, he was imprisoned for his political activities. He spent his time in a Serbian jail until 2001. And some people say that because of this, he wants to show himself that that he's a bigger Albanian than the ones who fought in the KLA. And that now he wants an instant, that he wants a war which will cause him to win, which will lead to his victory. He knows that if a single Kosovar police officer is killed by the local Serbs, tensions and conflict between the ethnic Albanians and the Serbs, Garanis, and Romanis will begin. A war would start. And he bargained with his FSK, which are the Kosovo Security Forces, KFOR, and EULEX, which are international forces currently located in Kosovo since practically 1999, to put these rebellions down, which will cause the displacement of Serbs, the purification of Kosovo, and practically him being a winner. That could be the reason why Kurti is practically way more proactive and way more willing to send police officers or military members or parts of ROSU, which is a special anti-terror unit created by Kosovo, to fight off the Serbian civilian population. So something that he's just attempting to cause a war there. As for the situation, the north was taken over. All municipal buildings were captured, the Serb flags were taken down, and Kosovo ones were put up, and the new mayors found their way into the office. We'll see what happens now. Antony Blinken had condemned it. Edi Rama, the Prime Minister of Albania, has condemned it. The EU has largely condemned it. So we have seen Jens Stoltenberg call for dialogue. Practically a lot of even Western nations have condemned this move, which isn't necessarily good for Kurti, considering that most Kosovar leaders depend on Western support.
Is kind of a hot mess, and I don't mean that in a, in a negative way. It's just there's so much going on for such a little place, and you really I personally am very glad that you came on, because you deliver this information in such a way that it's easy to follow and you can manage it. Because if you I've tried personally to go and, you know, do this research on my own, and I get lost in translations, and it's difficult to really capture the uh atmosphere, the political tension in Serbia right now, and explain it properly. So I really appreciate that. I wanted to move away from Serbia, at least temporarily, uh, to Ukraine, where
Okay.
we had seen some Serbian munitions being used by the AFU against Russian soldiers, and that was a particular topical position that people were bringing up a lot, because traditionally, I think most people think that Serbia is pro-Russia. Russia tends to support Serbia, so I would like to hear your thoughts on that, and maybe an explanation on that I know you have.
Well, this news is actually proof that the claim usually made by Western analysts that Serbia is some form of mini Russia in the Balkans, or that we are some sort of Russian Trojan horse, is a form of lie, which is not a surprise to many people who have more than three functioning brain cells. And we have now, of course, seen these grad munitions being used. They're actually of decent quality. They have like one of the longest range, like the best range out of most grad munitions. And the Ukraine using them was generally shocking. But a lot of people in the West have casually ignored the story, and they just hear some person on Twitter who posts Z content and use that as proof that like Serbia is pushing a pro-Russian narrative. Of course, the situation is way more complicated. Vucic cooperates with multiple nations, and this form of operation was actually a form of smuggling, because he claimed that he sold them to Canada and that then Canada sent them to Ukraine. And he's attempting to cover it up by saying, oh, I didn't know they were going to send this to Ukraine. I don't know what he was thinking, if that's true. That why would Canada need grad munitions for their own armed forces? So his claim makes no sense. This was just an attempt to cover it up and to practically say to his pro-Russian voters that he isn't to blame. He's attempting to balance it between pro-Western voters and pro-Eastern voters. During 2019, there was a poll conducted about SNS supporters. Besides their education level, were asked about their geopolitical stance, and around 50% said they have a pro-Russian narrative, and that practically most of the other half is pro-European, and parts are pro-NATO. Now, this isn't the first case that Serbian weapons were smuggled. There was an incident a couple of years ago. It revolves around a military firm factory called Krušik. It's located in Valjevo. And turns out that the company smuggled weapons to Saudi Arabia, which ended up in Wahhabi and terrorist hands in Yemen to be used against the Houthis in Yemen. Now, to make things even more incriminating, turns out that the profits, which was like meant to go to Serbia, to the government, wasn't going there, but to the father of the Minister of Internal Affairs back then. That means the father of Nebojša Stefanovic, which caused a scandal. This was exposed by a whistleblower called Aleksandar Obradovic, who was illegally locked up because of it. Illegally because if he was a whistleblower, he must be protected by the law. And if he isn't a whistleblower, that means nothing. He wasn't breaking any company secret. And he was held in practically not solitary confinement, but in jail for well over 2 months. And he was like forced to be released in the end, which caused a huge scandal. So this isn't the first instance of the Serbian government smuggling weapons to someone for potentially personal profit.
That is definitely not only an issue in Serbia, but that's an issue throughout all of Eastern Europe. Weapons smuggling is nothing new, especially after the fall of the Soviet Union, that it became a commonplace practice. So, do you think that this gives any you basically said he's just balancing his voters. Do you think that this gives Russia any pause? My personal opinion on it is that Russia does it, it's just so insignificant to Russia that if, you know, Serbia remains peaceful and isn't another hotspot on the chessboard, then Russia can be happy about that. And a couple grad rockets aren't going to turn the tide of the war, so that's not going to push Russia into making Serbia an unfriendly country to Russia. It's more of just a they're doing what they need to do sort of thing. That's how I perceive it, but I'd love to hear your opinion on it.
That's true, actually. Russia doesn't want to lose Serbia. They don't. They do not want to have another pro-Western state. They do not want to have a people that are traditionally like have some closer ties to them start hating them. And Vucic, who claims that he's constantly in a tough spot, kind of is, but he's also in a former sweet spot actually, because Russia is pandering to him because they don't want to lose Serbia. The West panders to him because he's their man. He was practically installed by them, and his party was installed by them back in 2012. And China is pandering to him because of the Belt and Road Initiative and the fact that practically Vucic is handing over Serbian gold mines in exchange for extra political support.
And the handing over of gold mines is it, if I'm not mistaken, that's what a major cause of the original war in Yugoslavia was about, no? Because
Not quite. With Kosovo, it was the lead mines and the
lead
Trepča
mines,
mine,
that's right.
and the second largest silver mine in Europe, the Trepča mine, located in northern Kosovo.
So just so everybody's aware, these internal conflicts are marketed as, you know, ethnic struggles and historical issues, but there's usually an underlying reason why these
There's
conflicts
foreign support.
occur. And the fiscal benefits of, you know, the largest gold mine in silver are the largest silver mine in Europe is obvious, I think, to everybody. So these are the things that we need to look at deeper and further. When when we
Yeah, a lot of the the motives mainly of the ordinary people, the soldiers and everything, and even the politicians, is ethnic. Foreign involvement involves the mines and resources. That practically escalates it. The conflict itself, yes, it's sadly primarily ethnically based because a lot of the regions in the Balkans are ethnically diverse. There are multiple claims on each region, and of course, that has to burst eventually. That is why the Balkans have been constantly called the powder keg of Europe.
yeah, and there is this I'm curious. Do you feel that the Western influence in Serbia has diminished? I'm just curious as to, since the beginning of the SMO, have you seen more reluctance from the Serbian government to deal with the West in trying to maintain the balance between Russia and the West? Do you see them going along with most everything? How is the external influence on Serbia being presented right now, and what do you think the reality is?
It isn't changing much. It hasn't changed much. Vucic is still attempting to balance it because if he stops balancing and he picks a side completely, he's going to lose half of his voters, and that may mean his downfall, which is bad for him. Now, influence-wise, as I said, hasn't changed much. There are people who are pro-Russia. There are people who are pro-Ukraine. There are neutral people. It hasn't changed much since February 2022. There is a constant third that supports Russia. There is a constant 20% that supports Ukraine. And there's the rest, which are practically neutral or have like sympathies, but do not want to pick a side because it's practically seen as bad for them, or they're just not interested in the topic. So I'd say there isn't a much of a change. Vucic maybe slowly making a slightly more pro-Western stance, but that's practically it.
And when all of this, oh my God, dude, my dogs are barking up a storm right now. That's the bad part about having a mascot. That's a dog. um, I think they're done now. There, I wanted to ask one last question pertaining to Serbia. You touched on it earlier with the recent shootings and the supposed gun restrictions that, you know, Vucic wanted to bring in. I'm curious as to your thoughts on how that will affect Serbian security. I think one of the most interesting things about the Serbs, especially the Serbs in Kosovo, is that they always seem to be ready to fight. You have this homegrown, very, motivated, it feels, fighting force that is just kind of protecting Serbs in Kosovo right now. And I'm curious as to your thoughts on the plans of potential population disarmament and how that will affect Serbian national security.
I mean, this disarmament, if it happens, is in reality going to be only selective. The SNS hooligans, the ones who support Vucic, won't keep their arms. They won't be able to terrorize the population. That's the point. The disarmament, if it happens, the goal is to simply disarm the opposition, to make sure that they cannot resist if Vucic attempts to impose a full-blown dictatorship. And as for security, state security, of course, is going to increase if you increase surveillance, but it's primarily going to increase the power of the party and of Vucic himself. That is why the people are even more angry, because they know that this practically these measures that he wanted or that he wants and that he's currently wanting to implement are meant to increase his power and nothing else. It's a power grab, to say the least. The Serbian population was armed since day one. Back in the old days, almost every single house had a gun, which was hanging in the room. And there were no mass shootings or mass murders or rebellions every single day. But people were free. They were secure. They were able to fight for their own land if they were invaded. This would just simply reduce their own security for a quote unquote liberty. And I think Benjamin Franklin once said a population that sacrifices its freedoms for some liberty deserve neither. And we aren't having it, luckily. We did not succumb, we did not accept the measures, and people are protesting. And to an extent, people should hope that the protests succeed, there's snap elections, and the Vucic's power is diminished or that he collapses. That is, in a way, the best outcome. And people from the party, from his party, are already attempting to stoke fears of a civil war. Vucic, during his rally, hinted for some reason that he won't be leaving the country, which is quite suspicious, to say the least. And an MP in the Progressive Party, Bukarec, literally said that the opposition is armed and that they're ready to shed blood, along those lines. And that means that they're already attempting to implant in their voters the idea that their next door neighbor is the enemy. And that means that most likely they do not want to step down by peaceful means. I hope I'm wrong, but it seems that this could not be the case.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think that honestly, I think that this is the proper place to end this. People only have such a long attention span, and Serbia is a very complicated topic, and I think we delivered the information acutely and accurately. So, Cossack, I appreciate you coming on, man. We're gonna end up doing this, I think, again in a couple weeks. So, why don't you tell everybody where they can find you and how they can support you?
They can find me on Twitter. The username is Panonski, Panonski underline Kozak, Kozak.
And we
The Z
will
doesn't have to do anything with Ukraine. It's just the way we pronounce it.
and we will post that in on the little background thing. So if you want to follow him, make sure you guys go do it. He posts some good content, and he has his thumb on the heartbeat of Serbia. So if you're interested in this topic specifically, please go follow him. He is a resource. Thank you so much, Kostek. Thank you to all my listeners. Until next time, guys. Goodbye.